And my screen is green again. Welcome everyone. My name is Jillian Graber. I am Executive Director of Protect PT, and you can see me on the green screen right now. I don't know why this is happening, but thank you very much for participating today in our virtual lunch hour. We have today Justin Nobel. He writes on issues of science and environment for Rolling Stone, Audubon, Oxford American, DeSmog, and other U.S. magazines. We want to welcome Justin to our virtual lunch hour today, and we're talking about radioactivity in oil and gas. I know that this is something that folks have been, really talking about for some time now, and we're really excited to have Justin on with us today to talk about these issues. And I hope that my video comes back up in just a second. I've been having some technical difficulties here. Yep, there we go. So I apologize in advance for those. Some of the software that we've been using for our virtual lunch hours sometimes is not cooperating. And great, we have our first person chiming in. Thank you so much for joining us today. Pushing Chi. And so welcome, Justin. Thanks so much for being here with us. And do you have another introduction you'd like to say other than what I just told everybody?
No, you covered it really well, Jillian. Thank you. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk about these issues. Thanks everyone for joining.
Great. And we had everyone register today through Eventbrite, and there's a reason why. We only have registrations for certain guests, so we wanted this to be a really interactive presentation and conversation with Justin, because we find that it's we're really lucky to have him today. And so if you want to post questions in the chat, Patrick, if you'll go to the next screen, I want to show you guys. We had this poster made, and this is really the subject we're talking about today, leachate. And we had this poster made by a group called The Waterways. They're artists from Philadelphia. And they were kind enough to make this poster for us, along with some other things that we'll show at the end of the presentation. But if you have a question and you've registered, go ahead and ask that question during the presentation, and we will send you a free poster. And so it looks like this. The inside cover really goes over the process of why the landfill leachate is so problematic, which we're going to talk to Justin about today. And then the outside cover, the back cover has Beaverzilla, which we just got t-shirts and stuff made with, and it just talks about the impacts of our waterways. So so chime in and please join in the conversation. So go ahead to the next screen, and I'm going to have Justin take it from here.
Okay, super. I love that art, and it's fantastic that people are thinking of a lot of different creative ways to describe these problems. That's exactly what needs to happen. So yeah, if you've checked out the Rolling Stone article, you're aware that it's a pretty broad topic. The radioactivity brought to the surface in oil and gas development, and the many different pathways of contamination posed to the industry's workers, the public and communities, and the environment. Today, I'm going to try and really needle in on this specific topic of landfill leachate. And we can go to the next slide. Just a quote I always like to start with because it's so powerful. Essentially, what you are doing is taking an underground radioactive reservoir and bringing it up to the biosphere where it can interact with people and the environment. So we don't think of oil and gas development in this light. We think of a lot of other things when we think of oil and gas, and fuel, of course, for things we often use every day, even if we're critical of it. But this is also oil and gas. This is happening too. We are bringing up a lot of radioactivity. Dr. Marco Kaltofen, 2 doctors there. That's how good he is. But he really is a fantastic nuclear forensic scientist based in the Northeast, and like a Sherlock Holmes for radioactivity, and has really helped me and some other communities as well crack into this problem. But I think this is important to start with a framework. Radioactivity will come to the surface inevitably in oil and gas development. How do we deal with it? And we can go to the next slide. Another standard in these talks, but this is such an important little diagram. What are the ways it's coming to the surface? And so we have brine, and I talk a lot about that. Brine often is going to be put into a brine truck, sent off to an injection well. Today, focusing largely on drill cuttings when we talk about leachate, but brine comes into the picture as well. And then we have a lot of different scales and sludges. And if you look at the quote on the right side, this really starts to get at the landfill problem. So this is Bill Hughes. He had an expertise in landfills. He was an industrial electrician. You can see there, 15 years overseeing a municipal landfill in West Virginia's heavily fracked Wetzel County. So same issue that we have across southwestern PA. Some of these municipal landfills began to accept copious amounts of waste. And Bill Hughes was one of the people, a really informed and energized resident who started essentially following trucks and putting the pieces together himself, taking photos, and he passed away pretty recently. But the work he laid out was tremendous, and I think his quote is really spot on here. Regulators just were not prepared to handle the massive amount of waste that this new drilling process was going to bring to the surface. And so this little diagram actually does convey, well, why? Why so much more waste in fracking than in conventional oil and gas development, which has been happening for years across Pennsylvania? And a lot of that has to do with this innovation of horizontal drilling. So with conventional drilling, you just drill down vertically, as you see in the little part of the diagram on the left. With fracking, we're drilling down vertically, but then we're also going to drill horizontally. And those boreholes are called laterals, and they can be 1 mile, 2 miles, and at this point, even longer than that. And so when you think of, well, a 2 mile lateral, that's really exciting. That's a lot of cuttings you're going to be bringing to the surface. You're removing all the material within that 2 mile space, and that has to come to the surface. And where does that go? That goes to your local landfill, because it's a non-hazardous waste stream according to U.S. law. And also, as the next slide will show, in the Marcellus, it's a radioactive waste stream. So that zone that we're tapping into with the Marcellus Shale, the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, has known for some time that black shales, such as the Marcellus Shale, can have a high radioactivity content. And this is another really important paper, a standard as in my presentations on this topic, but it's so significant. I mean, we have known for a long time that there is a high amount of radioactivity in the black shales, and there is actually a relationship between the oil yield and the radioactivity, which is interesting geologically. But what that means is if you're going to be bringing all this stuff up, we know it has this content. We should have been a little bit better prepared, because this paper is from 1960. That's well before fracking began. And yet we really were not. And just some interesting quotes, from that paper conveying how much uranium is down there. A lot of the radioactive elements of concern when we get to the landfill setting, it's not necessarily uranium, although uranium is there, but it's some of the daughter products. So uranium was what we were looking for in the 50s and 60s, and so that's why it's the focus of this paper, but they very well could have talked about radium or some of the other daughter products of uranium. And we can go to the next slide. So this is, I'm really trying to get into an issue that I know a lot of people are thinking about in Pennsylvania, where these landfills are sited and blossoming. And this is a report that Argonne National Lab did for the state of North Dakota. And it's a really important report. North Dakota, huge fracking boom, similar to Pennsylvania, the Bakken, and the state asked Argonne to look at some of the radioactivity problems as they were really getting deep into harnessing this resource. And argon is part of the Department of Energy. There's some fantastic scientists at Argonne. It is very much an arm of the Department of Energy. So often the reports are quite enabling of industry. And I think very not necessarily as critical as I think sometimes the science points out, but still, they have their input. And in this case, it's significant because they do provide some concerns, and they're telling. And so I've highlighted part of the section where Argonne is looking at landfills, and Argonne is saying, yeah, you can have these landfills and you can take oil and gas waste, but we're going to tell you that you shouldn't take more than 25,000 tons of T-norm waste a year. And then they give some limits on thorium, which is interesting. That's another radioactive element that will be found in cuttings and in shales like the Marcellus. Not sure why they didn't look at some of the other elements, but I'm focusing right here just on that limit. They're saying 25,000 tons. So this is Argonne, really the nation's premier oil and gas radioactivity experts, saying it's okay to do this, but no more than 25,000 tons. And then we can go to the next slide. This is taken from physicians, scientists, and engineers for healthy energy, PSE. They have a really great tool. I know there's a lot of folks putting together tools for how to look at PA's waste, but they have a fantastic one, and it's really easy to use, and the website is right there, and you can look at how much waste landfills across Pennsylvania has accepted. This is, I think, like 2008 to 2017, so roughly in like the boom time of the Marcellus, and 25,000, even multiplied by like 8 or 9 years, that gets you to like maybe 200,000, 250,000. And you can see landfills like Arden in southwestern Pennsylvania have taken nearly 1 million tons. So we're a lot more, and this is oil and gas waste. This isn't, that doesn't include household garbage and whatnot. So we are far over the limits that even the very circumspect government agency that has looked at this have come up with. And I think that alone is reason for pause. And I've taken some of these questions, versions of these questions, to DEP, and I've had a lot of questions over the past couple of years. And this specific line of questioning, they never got back on. But they tell me that they have considered limits as well. As in, we are thinking about numbers and we've set a cap, and I want to know what the cap is. And there very well may be one, but I haven't taken that correspondence to its end. So I'm really curious what DEP considers the cap is. I mean, how much waste is too much waste to put in these landfills? Because if you think about what Argonne National Lab said, and then you look at the numbers, I would say you're already well over the too much waste point at many of these landfills. So that, I think that's an important pathway in. And again, a lot of, the regulators will ignore PSE, they'll ignore even, some of the fantastic academic universities that have done research on this. But Argonne, you can't ignore Argonne. Argonne is, that's their people, and they're actually setting some limits here that DEP appears to be allowing to be breached. We can go to the next slide, because this is something else from Argonne. And again, we're talking about usually an agency that has really enabled this development to go forward, but there are some points where even Argonne is concerned. And one of them is evaporating leachate. And we'll just read this out. Any T-norm that mobilizes into the leachate will accumulate within these evaporation ponds over time and will result in increasing T-norm. So, they're again, Argonne is saying, of course, the leachate is going to have radioactivity. So skipping to the last part of the sentence, furthermore, the use of fans or spray systems to enhance the evaporation rate from the ponds may result in the formation of aerosols containing T-norm, which may travel downwinds of the ponds. Now, this is what you get in these government reports. You get a sentence like that saying, if you evaporate your leachate, you're putting radioactivity into the air and it's going to go downwind of the ponds. And what's always extraordinary to me is like, I mean, that is a devastating sentence. Basically, you're saying you're going to spray radioactivity into the air and it's going to go to the communities that are adjacent. But they never take that extra step and put that warning call out. But I certainly think it's appropriate for me as someone writing about this and conveying it back to you all. I mean, that is what they're saying here. You will put radioactivity into the air and you will have fallout downwind. That is what they're describing. That's a pretty frightening situation. And again, coming from Argonne National Lab, part of the Department of Energy, I think it's a very powerful rebuke of this idea that you can safely evaporate leachate. Disastrous idea. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And just this comes up when you start to crack into this issue. You start to look at the leachate, you look for radium. Radium is this radioactive element that can be soluble in water, moderately soluble at times. And so it's going to be flowing with the leachate. It's often what we're looking for. And what are the limits? People may be well aware of some of them, but I just really want to hit this because it's so important. So EPA has a safe drinking water limit of 5 picocuries per liter. This is for 2 different isotopes of radium that we find commonly in oil and gas waste, radium-226 and 228. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a discharge limit for each of those isotopes, each of those radionuclides as well, and it's 60 picocuries per liter. And just to explain what that means that a facility regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, such as a nuclear power plant, such as a uranium mill, these sites cannot discharge to the environment a stream of waste that has radium-226 greater than 60 picocuries per liter or radium-228 greater than 60 picocuries per liter. They cannot do that. That is happening right now at PA landfills. They are doing that, but yet the Nuclear Regulatory Commission facilities cannot do that. So somehow what is too dangerous for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not too dangerous for landfills overseen by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And I mean, that's clearly absurd. That is not scientific. If something is too radioactive on one side, it clearly is also too radioactive in another setting. And it's just, the awkward and inappropriate nature of our regulations that allow that to happen. And then this is just in correspondence with EPA. They've conveyed to me liquid waste containing radium-226 above 60 picocuries per liter for these 2 different isotopes. They define that as radioactive. So again, that 60 becomes an important number. And we can go to the next slide and see that Pennsylvania, this is from their much trotted out 2016 TNORM report, which had this general conclusion that the radioactivity isn't something to worry about, but you look in the weeds, which I know Public Herald and a lot of folks are now doing, which is excellent. You see that there is significant cause for concern even within Pennsylvania's TNORM report. And here you see they did look at oil landfills accepting oil and gas waste. They refer to them as selected landfills, 9 selected landfills, and they're talking about the radium-226 there in that middle sentence, range from 67 to 378 picocuries per liter. So we're above 60 every time. 60 is the limit. So that whole range is too high to be discharged at a facility overseen by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But yet here is DEP saying, oh yeah, this is what we found, and it's what we found, and it's going out into our environment. So they have known since they did this report, the research was actually done in 2015, they've known for 5 years now, half a decade, that their landfills that are accepting oil and gas waste are capable of producing streams of waste that have radium in excess of what would be permissible at a facility regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But they seem to think this is not a problem. This absolutely is a problem. And we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this was just the last thing. This is something I'm getting into now, but it certainly affects Pennsylvania. I know Waste Management oversees many landfills in Pennsylvania. So what we have are these massive waste handling companies such as Waste Management. They're the largest in the nation. The second is Republic, and they are buying up smaller, you could call them mom and pop waste companies. And this is an example of that. This is something I found in Texas, and it's really interesting. You had Petra Waste Environmental, which was a Texas-based firm. Waste Management is based in Houston. So technically they're a Texas-based firm, but Waste Management is all over the US and in Canada. It's a huge company, multinational company, and they bought up this Texas-based oil and gas waste handling company and took over their landfills. And you can see that Waste Management, this is from a brochure, the left side of the screen, they are reaching out to oil and gas. So, if you're in business of taking waste and you're looking at oil and gas, you start to recognize, look at the numbers we saw in the previous slides, hundreds of thousands of tons of waste a year. To them, that's stuff that has to go in the back of a truck that ends up in a landfill that they get money for. So of course they're going to get into this game. Now, what is striking to me is the liability that they have created for themselves in getting into this game. And I'm very interested, and this is something I'll be pursuing as I move forward in the book, down the line, when you have these landfills collecting waste in ways that we still can't even predict, and accumulating it in certain areas, what's going to happen to these landfills? Are they future Superfund sites? Certainly, many of the experts I'm talking to are just appalled by this situation and do believe that this is a huge looming issue. It's a massive Superfund or Superfund-esque problem that's being created, and suddenly the nation's biggest waste hauling company seems to be intentionally saddling themselves with this issue. We can go to the next slide, or that might be the last slide. That's the last slide. So yeah, something I'll just mention here then is, because it's fascinating and important, Bill Gates is a huge investor in both Waste Management and Republic. And I'm just seeing, I've drawn up a stat that I just looked up. Let me just see if I can quickly get this on the computer, because it's amazing to me. He has millions of shares in Waste Management, and also is a primary investor in Republic, which is the second largest waste handling company in the US, and also a la Waste Management in the process of kind of coalescing some of these smaller landfill companies. So obviously something as a journalist who's probing this, I'm at some point soon going to be reaching out to Mr. Gates on this, because are you aware of what's in these landfills? We'll see. But yeah, we can leave it there. That's all. I just wanted to hit a couple of the points that I was finding that I thought would be relevant, and definitely happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and actually, Justin, we have a bunch of questions, but a couple things that I wanted to point out before we do that I thought were really striking. You had mentioned that one of the ways that this Bill Hughes kind of started investigating this was that he was following trucks. And actually, that's how we started to think about this in our community. There was a tanker truck coming past our office every day, and it was all day, every day. And someone said, hey, they're dumping fracking waste. And we thought, well, we don't know if it's fracking waste. We don't know where the truck is going to or coming from. So one day we saw the truck, and sure enough, so it looked like they were actually taking the hose and sticking it into a stream. What they were doing instead is putting it into a manhole next to a stream. And so we really questioned this, and we followed the truck, and he went to the landfill. And that led us down this path of questioning, why are they dumping this liquid in the sewer? And why is it happening so frequently? First it was 2 days a week, then it was 3 days a week, then it was 5 days a week. And first it was one truck all day, every day. Then it was 2 trucks, 3 trucks all day, every day. And so when we contacted the DEP about it, we found that it's leachate from the landfill. And they had so much rain that they couldn't keep up with the leachate pond. And so that's kind of what started for us, the investigation. And we had heard a story. So back in 2019, the beginning of 2019, I believe, there was a story that came out about the Westmoreland Sanitary landfill, and the municipal water authority was trying to process the wastewater and was unable to continue doing that. And we had Dr. John Stoles on several months ago talking about that. But basically, this Westmoreland Sanitary landfill now, just back in June, applied for a permit to evaporate leachate. I believe actually one of our partner organizations had reached out to you about that, because we were like, does anybody know anything about that? And what you were talking about with the evaporation is what we had written in our comment to the DEP. So thank you for that information. Back in June, and then also today, because I think it's really important that people know about this stuff going on, because what is in the landfill is not just our garbage. It's also essentially the oil and gas garbage, and that garbage is radioactive. And I don't think a lot of people understand that, and I think it's really important work that you're doing. So our first question, do you want to respond to that before we go on? Or are you good?
No, you're spot on. People have to monitor, people have to follow. That's just the way it is right now. And yeah, if we're uneducated, then it's just a bunch of trucks. And so we really have to educate ourselves and be able to see what's really happening.
Yeah. And one of the things that struck me the first time I heard you speak, over, I think it was last winter, when you spoke at the League of Women Voters event. They have a straight scoop on shale every year, and it's an excellent event if anybody has an opportunity. It's normally in November, and I hope they do a virtual event this year. But one of the things that really struck me about what you said is that you do the research, and when you talked about back then that in 1960 they knew about this. The government knew about this, the EPA knew about this, everybody knew that this stuff was radioactive, and it's just now that it's starting to harm people, that people are starting to talk about it. It's like it was swept under the rug, and that really, that's something that I think is has been a detriment to the communities that live around shale gas. And a lot of these communities are kind of hit double, because we have the extraction and we have the waste. So we now have two sources from where it's coming up and where it's going to, that we have to worry about radioactivity and we have to worry about waste. So it's just crazy, and it's not just one landfill; it's a bunch. But Billy had asked, I'd like to know how they are determining how much waste is too much waste. And I think this goes back to the one article that you had mentioned.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and it's still an outstanding question that I have with the DEP. So I can't answer it right now. I certainly hope that they can answer it for me or for you. I recall my back and forth that they conveyed to me that they do have a limit. I think it actually was in an interview with some of my colleagues at Public Herald. They conveyed that there's a limit, and I thought, oh wow, this is great. Well, now I have to hold them to it and say, what is that limit? And I haven't been able to get that yet. It may well just be they're busy and it's there and they're proud of it and believe in it, or maybe it's something that is already over. I just don't know. But I think, we should all take that question to them, because they need to answer that question. And then we need to look at the data, which now is very well presented in different ways, and determine, are some of these landfills over or well over that limit.
That's great. And so the next question says, RNC limit won't catch what becomes aerosolized, or if they are diffusing the content of the radium-226, that should be accounted for and regulated. It's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good, I think it's a good comment, and it gets at an important issue, which is that, and something that Bill Hughes was trying to say as well with his work, that this, even if you set a limit, even if you say 25,000 tons, you're still letting a really complicated waste stream in. Rainwater and leachate will accumulate it in ways that we really haven't studied that well when it comes to some of these radioactive elements. And so we even if there were an appropriate limit set, or even if there were some limit, there are still going to be concerning things happening at these landfills that our present way of monitoring is not capturing. And I think that's part of the problem. Is the regulatory agencies have put a somewhat simplistic cap over a very, very complicated problem. They haven't caught up to some of what the science has brought to light. So certainly looking at, this is something that I know different researchers in the area are now getting funding to do, which is another exciting and good development. Let's look at how much radon is rolling off the side of these landfills. Let's look at radon then decays out to some heavy metals, radioactive metals, such as lead-210, polonium-210. Where are these things falling out? Where is this stream drifting and going from the landfill? But yeah, absolutely good point. Even with a limit, there still would be things being missed the way the regulations are now.
Yeah, and actually there are some landfills that, and we're being told by residents, we are in touch with residents that live around the landfills, and we're being told that trucks are going in and out at night that are carrying oil and gas waste. Some of these residents have reported a lot of health impacts, and we're taking a look at that, because at the end of the day, none of this stuff would concern us if it didn't concern the environment and the humans that live in that environment. So I think it's really important to note that when that stuff rolls downhill, it's rolling into people's backyard, and people are being really sickened by it right now, right this minute. And it's definitely something that needs to be researched more, because I don't see any stop in sight. I think that the application for the leachate evaporation tells us that. And even if they stop drilling today, that waste they've been accepting that waste for over 10 years. It's gonna keep leaching out of the leachate. It's going to keep coming, it's going to be present in the water. That whole landfill is contaminated. And we're going to keep, rain's going to happen. We're going to keep, experiencing in southwestern PA, these bouts of rain where we get, rain for days, and these leachate ponds overfill, and they're going to have to do something with it. They're not going to be able to treat it. And that's what we're finding time and time again when we talk to folks. So we have another question. Marin asks something about jurisdiction. What are the different radioactive... Oh, this is another question. One second. I don't know whether the RNC regulations are based on one hazard at a time, nor if actual nuclear power pollution tends to be one isotope at a time. She's asking, are these isotopes volatile going into the gas phase, or are they particulates carried in droplets? The ability to spread after aeration depends strongly on the question, as seen with coronavirus. Oh, and I think you're on mute, Justin.
It's a really great question, and two different good parts to it. So radon is a radioactive gas, and radon-222 is the direct daughter product of radium-226. We have radon. So if you throw down a bunch of drill cuttings and there's a lot of radium, inherently radon will be being formed as well. And radon also comes up with the natural gas stream. But we know, that often radon follows methane and also follows some of the natural gas liquids. And if you have a landfill that is producing gas, you're going to have radon in, and there's a lot of oil and gas waste, you will have radon as well. So radon might be what's coming off the landfill, or if you're burning the methane, which I know they're trying to collect methane and burn it, you would expect that you could have radon there as well. But radon has a pretty quick half-life. It decays rather quickly. Its half-life is about 3.8 days. And when it decays, it goes through a series of very quick decays. So it becomes different isotopes of polonium, and it goes through a decay chain and eventually settles out at lead-210. But in those moments when it's becoming different isotopes of polonium and bismuth, it's a solid. So it's an amazing thing, radioactivity. I mean, an element, radon, will blast off a little piece of itself and then become another element. And it goes from a gas to a solid. And in that point, the solid, whereas radon is a noble gas, it has kind of a perfect electron shell structure, and it doesn't really want to bond with anything. But these daughter products, they are charged, and they will quickly form bonds with aerosols. So they will form bonds with other little particulates in the air. So you're creating a situation where you're venting something that is in this active state, and as it decays, it's forming a radioactive metal, which will, yes, be attaching to other tiny little particles in the air. And it's a very complicated science of how those things fall out. They can fall out with precipitation. They can be blown way up into the air and not necessarily be a problem for us humans down here on the Earth. Or they can, and they can be so scattered so quickly as to, also be dispersed, not present a problem. Or they can settle in a way that enables them to accumulate in certain areas. And that is what, we need to start looking at. How are they falling out? Often the regulators will say, well, radon is vented to the atmosphere and it's gone. Well, no, that's not necessarily the case. Radon is vented to the atmosphere. It forms other radioactive elements which quickly bond with things in the atmosphere and can then fall out with precipitation or do any number of things. And some of those pathways haven't really been examined. And just to touch the first part of the question, which is really significant, I didn't mention it in this talk, but oil and gas waste itself has received a stunning exemption. And this predates any of the typical exemptions we're used to from the past 10 or 15 years. This goes back to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which was in the late 1970s, and it was intended to be a way for the US to deal with industrial waste and hazardous waste. And so the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act takes a look at the different waste streams that are produced by industry in the US, and it tries to determine which are hazardous and which are non-hazardous. And if something is hazardous, at least we're going to recognize it as hazardous. We're going to ensure that it's appropriately handled. It's put in a vehicle designed to contain hazardous material, driven by a driver appropriately trained to handle hazardous material, and it ends up at a final disposal site designed to contain hazardous material. And it's a good idea. And one of the problems is oil and gas receive this exemption. So all of these waste streams that my earlier slide showed, the produced water or brine, the drill cuttings, the sludges and scales, these are all waste streams produced at an oil and gas well. They can be highly hazardous, contain not just radioactivity, but heavy metals, volatile organics, carcinogens such as benzene, known hazards, known toxics. Yet, according to US law, it is a non-hazardous waste stream. And so that is why you can have it accumulating in landfills in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's by US law, it is not hazardous, which is a huge problem because it is hazardous. And New York, if you're following, New York recently put out some legislation to alter that, to reverse that loophole, at least within New York State. It doesn't help you all in Pennsylvania, but at least it's a sign that state legislatures are waking up to this issue.
Yeah. It would be great if Pennsylvania could get on board with a lot of what New York has been doing to protect the people. And we have another question. What are the best things for citizens to document or do to help reporters like you get the word out to collect evidence, Justin? And that's a great question. I love that question.
Yeah, it is really good. Thank you for asking it. I think just by observing and recording in whatever way seems most appropriate to you is a way of laying down a record that a reporter or another storyteller can follow up on. So, I mean, if someone wants to, is into painting and like wants to just paint what they see at the landfill, I mean, that's creating a record, and someone can see that and run with that. If other people want to sit and count trucks and say, you know what, are they delivering late at night? Let's safely set up a way to monitor that, and we're going to just stand, at the deli close to the entrance to the site and see if trucks are coming in. I mean, something like that. Or just even, I'd be so curious of a community survey that tries to talk to all the different people living in the direct vicinity, especially on the more downwind side of some of these landfills, and just see what is the extent of some of the illnesses, and do you have illnesses that are reproduced across a community and across sites. And like you mentioned, Jillian, I certainly hear a lot of very concerning and I think credible stories of illness of people living near these sites. But I think to start to put together, well, what are symptoms that maybe can be connected? I mean, again, there's a lot at these landfills. It's going to be hard to figure out what might be causing things, even if you start to see a threat emerge. But you're never going to get there unless you really try and probe it deeply and ask people. So I would say any way you can ask questions, go into your community, observe, record, talk to people. It's all can be helpful. And then work with groups like yours. If you don't have a means of getting information out, I know groups, like you're involved with, Jillian, and many other groups across Pennsylvania are really helpful at bringing people's observations to light.
Yeah, we actually, thank you for that, Justin. We have on our website under fracking in your neighborhood. If you go to our website, which is just protectpt.org, and you go to fracking in our neighborhood, under complaint and compliance, you can see that we have ways that are kind of tried and true methods of reporting and documenting violations near your home. And so if you can read through that, and we're actually in the process of hopefully soon developing an app, a mobile app for people to report things that they smell, see, hear, and experience health impacts. And then that report can get sent on to folks that could potentially help those people. I think it's a great idea to do a survey, Justin. And I'm going to work on with my team to see if that's something we could feasibly do, because we have been reaching out to those folks recently that are around this one particular landfill, Westmoreland County's Westmoreland Sanitary landfill, trying to see what kind of help that they need, whether it's resources, whether it's just knowing how to document things, whether it's air monitoring. We actually just bought 3 new air monitors to start to try to monitor the air around that landfill. And I think it's a great idea to do a survey. I hadn't thought about that, and I would love to talk with you offline about what are some good questions to ask, because I think that's key when you're doing a survey, are the questions that you're going to ask folks. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you to everyone out there that's been asking questions. I've got another question from Josh. Have you talked with local writer and reporters in Southwest PA? Who are some writer reporters people should turn to get out the message? So that's a good question. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, Public Herald is an awesome grassroots investigative site based in southwestern Pennsylvania that's been covering fracking really well and really doing reporting that unfortunately a lot of the big newspapers just haven't been able to do or haven't done on fracking. I mean, so following holding DEP accountable and asking them really tough, uncomfortable questions and just staying on them. And Public Herald has been doing this, since the early part of the fracking boom, and they continue. And some really sophisticated stories coming out, and I'm excited to be working with them on a story actually coming out soon, and with another reporter there, Kristen Losey. We're working together on a story that is going to convey some of the situation that workers are dealing with, and industry workers, and that's a good one. I think, there are different writers at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I think as far as newspapers and oil and gas plays go, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette has actually done a really fantastic job of covering this. And I know they have, reporters on the economic side, and then also covering some of the health issues really well. And I know that they take readers' tips. I know a lot of those most striking stories in the Post-Gazette have come from community members noticing things and observing. So I think that's an important lesson. I mean, our stories as investigative reporters we find them from people on the ground. And if you are listening to people on the ground, you can hear them. And to their credit, those they have been to a large extent. So again, your observation of do you see or record something or not, it really is important, because it can help more formal reporters produce stories. I know it's they're going through or appear to be going through different issues at the Post-Gazette, and that's the trouble these days is, how long is any newspaper going to last? But they've been doing excellent work. They still have people on the case. And then what's really exciting is I think there's a lot of other new models. There's people trying to do podcasts. Someone approached me recently from Ohio who wants to start a podcast that focuses on fracking issues in Ohio. And the negative of the media web falling apart is that the newspapers have lost some of their energy and influence, but you also have enabled it to be easier for people to put out content on their own. So even, I would encourage high school students and students interested in writing to just start a blog and start recording these things, because it can get picked up. So I think, and I'll mention one other thing. The reporter, Ken Ward, is it, at the West Virginia, the big West Virginia paper. He won a MacArthur Genius Grant for his reporting. He's historically covered the coal industry really well, and he's now refocused on fracking. And I saw that he just started a new outfit, and I'm going to look it up right now because I don't know the name off the top of my head, but that can be another good resource. I know he covers fracking in West Virginia, but certainly some of the issues are relevant to Pennsylvania too.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good point for people to note that, when you go to a reporter with a story, it might be a way for you to also get back other folks that are interested or have been experiencing the same thing, contacting you as a result of that story. I know that there was a story about noise in the Post-Gazette, and I think that I had contacted the reporter and I said, hey, here's my information if they want noise monitoring, and they called me the next day. So those are things that we can do as organizations that work on these things. We can be looking out for those types of articles and stories and trying to connect with folks who might need the types of programs and services that we have to offer as nonprofits. We have a comment and then another question. So it says, how about fact-finding group like the one they did in Monroeville for the landfill tour? They actually just asked for a tour of the landfill. And actually, one of our staff members also just went on a tour of the Westmoreland Sanitary landfill, and it was very eye-opening, and brought that information back to us. And I see also that Marin has asked, sorry she didn't see your reply about the jurisdiction. Is it just NRC versus DEP, etc.? Um, it was more than a comment than a question. No need to clarify now, but if you have any other thoughts on that. You're still on mute.
Yeah, no, I can. It's so right. It's quite confusing. But part of the issue here is that, and what I'm trying to say is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission never took charge of the radioactivity brought up in oil and gas development. It is a source of radioactivity. They look at other sources of radioactivity, but they have not included that in their purview. So even though some of these waste streams have radioactivity on par with the things they are looking at that are concerning, they're not looking at this. And thus, if you're producing those waste streams, you get a pass because you're producing radioactivity that in another industry would be more carefully regulated. In this industry is not. So the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is not involved, and because of that, they don't have to check for radium, for example, in leachate. And so this is part of the problem, though, that an operator can say, I'm following all the laws. I'm doing this by law, and they may be correct, but the laws aren't appropriate. So yeah, I mean, that creates an issue. And I can talk if it is complicated. So if someone has a more detailed questions on the jurisdiction issue, I certainly can feel free to reach out. I can try and talk more on that.
That's great. Thank you, Justin. And so we also have another comment. With New York shut down, Ohio is now the epicenter of waste disposal. And now actually they're looking at PA. I mean, we have an injection well that was just permitted in Plum, an area very close to where our office is, very close to where we work in Allegheny County. And this is something that's a huge problem. And so now we're going to have waste from, coming from other sources. And we're almost out of time, but there's a couple things I want to mention before we go. I think this has been a really important conversation, and luckily we're going to be able to see this on YouTube. So, if you have questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to reach out to us or to Justin directly. Billy's asking questions on how to fight permits. And you know what? That's definitely something that we can talk about offline, because we that's something we engage in all the time here at Protect PT, talking about permitting and commenting on permits and things like that. But please, if you enjoyed this conversation and want other conversations like it, we want to know what topics you'd like to hear about. And we'd also like if you could do a survey to let us know how we're doing with our virtual lunch hour. In October, we're actually going to be taking a little break from virtual lunch hour. We have a guest next week, but for now we're going to be taking a little bit of a break. And then go ahead to the next slide, Patrick. Please also subscribe to our YouTube. That's how you'll get updates. And if you liked the artwork that we showcased in the beginning, all of the support that we get from residents is really, really important. And so because COVID has been so difficult for a lot of people economically, we thought, sometimes another way to contribute to an organization like ours and also have something for yourself as well, is to shop for different things. So we use the beautiful artwork that was produced by the Waterways folks, and we have posters, t-shirts, and some stickers with the artwork on it. So please go to our webpage and check that out as well. And if you'll go to the next screen, Our last lunch hour until November is actually going to be next week. We're going to have Frac Tracker on, really an excellent organization that has a lot of great tools to map out a lot of the stuff that's going on. And we're going to be talking to Matt Kelso and Erica Jackson from Frac Tracker. And Lois says she's wearing her t-shirt right now. Thank you so much, Lois. And thank you to Justin for joining us today. I think that the reporting that you're doing is the type of reporting that needs to be done. Facts are so important, and just the amount of research that goes into the reporting that you do is really stellar. And like I said, just when the first time I heard you speak, that was something that really stood out to me. Just the amount of research that goes into it, and finding all these articles, from from 1960, and these things that we have a body of evidence that's out there, and we need to harness that. And with that, I also want to mention, you mentioned PSC Healthy Energy earlier. PSC Healthy Energy has a great database called Roger. I forget what Roger stands for, but the database has you can search it by topic. So if you have certain topics that you want to learn more about, and it's just a bunch of peer-reviewed studies, a database full of this research, that if you have questions, you can go and search on their Roger. So if you go to PSC Healthy Energy, look them up online and look for their database, you can find a lot of information that you may have questions about, or you may be wondering about when it comes to oil and gas development. So thank you again, Justin, for joining us today. Do you have any last words of wisdom for us before we sign off for the day?
I'm just going to read this because I found it, and it's really
That's great.
So the Bill Gates. Overall, Bill Gates owns 33.1 million shares in Waste Management, 7.8% stake. And through his investment firm, Cascade Investment, he's the largest shareholder of Republican Services. So, the story is a Pennsylvania story, but it goes beyond. And I think you all should know that too, some of the people behind some of this and profiting off of it. But no, really so important to talk. I'm happy there's an audience to organize and listen, and I'm pretty easily accessible. So always feel free to reach out on social media or email if you have further questions. Thank you, Jillian, and everyone there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great topic to discuss, and we'll keep the conversation and the work going. And thank you for everything that you do every day. And thanks for everyone that tuned in and had questions for Justin. We're going to be sending out those leachate posters to everyone, and we appreciate your input and your joining the conversation. Thank you. Everyone is thanking you on on their comments, and join us next week for our last lunch hour for a little bit. We'll be taking a little break in October, and we'll see you then noon on Thursdays. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Oh, thank you.